When I woke up in the morning, Aaron had already ridden into Cumberland to get Brad a COVID test. I decided to hop on my bike and go check out an old tunnel that I had read about and see the bridge that led to it. Unfortunately, the tunnel was closed, but the bridge was still kind of cool and had this cool view of the campsite and downtown Cumberland. When Aaron got back, it turns out Brad's COVID test was positive, and the real hero of the trip turned out to be Chris Yonda, the mechanic at Dirty River, who drove all the way from Akron to pick him up. He had recently had COVID, so he would likely be the least to be reinfected. So the three of us carried on, heading towards the Gap Trail, finished the C&O Trail here. This is where it kind of changes over in Cumberland. That's a museum now and part of the national park. It was originally the station for the Western Maryland Railroad, which is kind of the line that we would be following that makes up what is now the Great Allegheny Passage Trail. We had a really good breakfast in Cumberland. It looked like it was about to storm and pour when we were leaving, so we really battened the hatches down on the bags and everything. I didn't take many more still photos on this trip because I had my good camera all sealed up. You notice a total change in vibe right away when you switch from the C&O to the Great Allegheny Passage, because you're going from a canal towpath trail to a old rail trail. So this trail, the railroad that the trail is based on, was basically built as a more direct route to compete, I believe, with the B&O Railroad, which had already been finished. And the first 25 miles out of Cumberland is a climb. I think you go about a little less than 2,000 feet up. It's only a rail grade, so it's not super steep, but 25 miles on loaded bikes, you do notice it. We were definitely traveling at slower speeds. The tunnels and everything are really cool. That's like kind of the main feature of this railway, just a more direct over the mountain, through the mountain line, which is what made it competitive. You can see it's raining a little bit here, but we amazingly never got more than just damp. Like, none of our bags got soaked through, none of our clothes got soaked through. On a hot day, it actually wasn't all that bad. I'm someone who doesn't really like to get very wet. I always hope we don't get wet on tour, and we just kept dodging the bullet, 5 days out on the trail and never really getting soaked is pretty amazing. I know some people really don't like climbing. This climbing isn't crazy, and it's worth it for, as you can see, the views we're getting and the tunnels and all that. A lot of people even said we were doing the trail backwards, that you should go the other way. I don't know. I think you kind of knock out this climb, and then you have, I think this climb took us 2 hours and 20 minutes, according to my Strava profile, what they consider the climb. And then you really have, a day and a half of downhill all the way to Pittsburgh. Here we are crossing the Mason-Dixon line. It's always surprising when you realize it's way up here. So again, something if you don't know about, you should definitely Google. But yeah, we had a good first day out on the trail. The surface is generally a little bit nicer than the C&O as well. Here it's kind of like cinder. A lot of it is, has kind of that bike path feel that you would probably be more accustomed to. There's some paved parts as you go through towns and things like that. Definitely photo worth as you get up towards the top of the climb. This next tunnel is the Big Savage Tunnel, and I believe it's the longest on the trail anywhere. It's really cool. It's surprising how long it is as you get going in there. After the tunnel, you're pretty close to the Continental Divide, the Eastern Continental Divide, which, the waters one way are going to the Gulf and the other way are going to the Chesapeake Bay. So we rode pretty much without stopping up here, and we kind of then took our first break hanging out. You can kind of see a climb profile right there. It's definitely not that dramatic when you're riding. Like I said, the climb is only 1.5 to maybe 3% grade in parts. Again, more noticeable on a loaded bike and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, lots of cool bridges, lots of cool views. The thing that we noticed about the Great Allegheny Passage versus the C&O is you kind of have to pay attention to get the good views. Not when you're crossing these big old rail bridges, that's kind of obvious. But as we got nearer to where we spent the first night, Ohio Pyle, on your left side, there's lots of pretty rock faces and even little waterfalls. And if you're not paying attention, you'll almost miss them. And then off to your right, in the direction we were heading, you will get glimpses of the river and the mountains, which are really beautiful. But if you don't pay attention, it can kind of just be like you're in a green tunnel, and you could just miss a lot of the cool sights along the way. So that's always one thing with doing bike tours. Along the C&O with all the historic stuff, and along the Gap with all these views, you just kind of have to decide how much mileage you want it to do, and how fast you want to be moving, and how much you want to kind of stop to take in the scenery. It's always kind of a little debate. I don't know if it would have been worth cutting back on the mileage to spend a little more time hanging out. Drinking beers, goofing off like this. But, when we're really tired, we start looking for a town, we find a place, and, we'll chill and hang out. But we definitely covered a lot of ground. Once you start going downhill, it's pretty cool. Even though in spots it might not be super noticeable that you are going down, you'll notice that you're riding in a gear or two harder. You're just going a few miles an hour faster than you have been the rest of the trip. It is noticeable. I asked my buddy Stu that I had mentioned talking to earlier, because he went the other direction, if he noticed that this was a climb in the other direction, and he said it wasn't it wasn't too tough. But you do notice like that kind of downhill false flat, that you are picking up more speed than you would expect to. More pretty views here as it's getting later in the day and we're getting closer to the Ohio Pyle State Park. That's a place I would like to go back to and spend more time. The scenery becomes really beautiful. I know there's waterfalls to explore, and I think natural water slides. We spent a little bit of time in the town, basically just getting our dinner and things like that. Cruised around. I went to an outdoor store because my camp pillow deflated, the valve broke. So right after this is where we went in and picked up some supplies and then got our dinner for the evening. We were actually going to be staying at Ohio Pyle's campground, which was up a really, it was over this bridge and then up a really steep gravel climb, really tough climb. I think I saw, gradients up over 20% as we got in there. We actually got in after dark. So we just lit like a quick stick fire, had like one beer, and then it was off to bed. It poured all night. It stormed. It was crazy. It looked like it was going to rain most of the morning. Again, by the time we started packing up, we were just so lucky the rain eased up, and it barely even, we barely even got damp. Camp stuff was damp, but this was our last day out on the trail, so it wasn't really a big deal or anything you had to worry about. I like to strap my rain fly to the outside of the bag to help it dry out, and then as we stop, I'll re-roll it different ways. The weather actually made for a beautiful morning as we had this fog, and mist, I guess, coming off the river. It was just really beautiful with the morning sun. We got going on the road earlier than we usually do this day. I think we were rolling maybe by 8:30. I think the storms kept us up a lot, so yeah, but you could just see how pretty it is through here. But you could also see what I'm saying about the green tunnel thing. If you don't pay attention, you would really kind of miss out on what's going on. But here we go again. The sun came out, and no matter how much we saw that rain was coming at different points throughout the day, we just somehow were lucky that we avoided it. There's parts of the trail that were wet, or we could see pavement and bridges that were wet, like right here. But, it just never got us, which I'm just so happy with. Our first day of tour last year, leaving Cincinnati, doing the Ohio to Erie, we got just soaked for 6 hours. Coming into this town, this is kind of when the feel of the trail changes. It gets a little more flat and open in parts, and you go through more towns as you get closer to Pittsburgh. And this is Connellsville. We couldn't find anything that was really open yet. We were a little early, so we even rolled through this park and there was a little coffee stand, but they didn't have food. So we decided to go to a grocery store and just pick up some stuff and then sit down and eat it. We actually found this place, which is super cool here on the other side of that park, where they have little lean-tos where you could camp for the night if you're riding on the trail. So it was a perfect little spot to take a break and enjoy our sandwiches from the grocery store and stuff like that. You kind of see how the vibe had changed here. It looks like more like a classic crushed limestone rail trail. Still unique, and I kind of like the idea that, or the feeling that it does change a little bit.
Whoa. Here's a lesson, folks. When I get tired, I can't get straight. But also, my hoo-ha hurts.
Anyways, we were all really feeling it. The last day on the Gap Trail we had done was about 80 miles, and this day was going to be about 80 miles as well. But in West Newton, they had this really cool pull-off with all these stands that service the trail. A brewery had taps out there. They had a little restaurant thing with snacks. So this town had really oriented itself as a trail town, or trail town, I think is the right term. But really, really cool that they had done that. Even some of these smaller towns we went through that didn't look like there was much going on would have people had put out coolers and benches and, just a cash box. So pretty cool that people were really capitalizing on the tourism from the trail. It does start to get much more industrial as you approach McKeansport, which is what this is. We tried to look for something in this town, and it didn't really look like anything was open. I don't want to judge someone else's town because I don't like it when people give our towns a bad reputation, but it seems like it's a little town that is, or a city that is on hard times maybe, hasn't fully recovered. Definitely had that Rust Belt feeling. That looked like a closed roundhouse there in the background. Cool bridges though as you cross over the rivers and you get near Pittsburgh. This, I think, when you hit there, you're about 10, 11 miles outside of Pittsburgh. We were originally thinking of trying to stop somewhere one more time, but you could see the sky is really darkening, and we just decided to try and finish off the ride, and then we could stop on the way home or stop in Pittsburgh and get, a bite to eat for dinner or something like that. We actually talked to a couple people out here on the trail that tried to give us a good tip for a better way to ride into Pittsburgh. I think the signage getting into Pittsburgh was better than it used to be. Me and Aaron had credit card toured the Gap Trail once before, but we still ended up messing it up somehow. Here we're still on the Gap Trail, but we went down by the river and somehow turned off. But we did still figure it out. We still got to the point which is considered the end of the trail, the terminus, and we got our photos in, our completion photos, just in time for a huge storm to come across the river, and we got absolutely drenched the last mile just getting back to our car in the parking deck. So stayed dry for 5 days out on the trail and got absolutely soaked right as we finished it. Anyways, the trip was awesome. It was a blast. If you haven't done the C&O Gap, it's touring that, there's a lot of ways to do it, and you should definitely check it out and try it. See you in the next one.